Want to determine a quorum, Bob?
Yeah, you do have a quorum. Mr. Patterson is here, Ms. Giles is here, Mr. Dixon is here, Mr. Bobine is here, Mr. Massey is here, Mr. Gerhardt is here. So you do have a quorum.
Great.
Do you like me to-
So Bob, lead on, McDuff.
Okay, I'm going to just take a second here to share my screen. Everyone can see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So what I'd like to do tonight is some of this we've covered before, but there are some folks that will be joining from the public that have not had an opportunity to hear any of this discussion. This presentation will be available on the town's website tomorrow. The introductory section of the form-based code that was drafted for the Metacom Avenue Special Revitalization District is available on the town's website now. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look at that. There's much more to follow from what is included in that introduction. I think the introduction is good because it kind of tells you how it works and you start to get into some of the elements, but once you get into the specific design requirements, that becomes quite lengthy. And without any exaggeration, when I said there was many hundreds of pages to follow, there will be. So tonight, what I would like to do is we're going to talk about why we're doing the zoning amendment. We've taken the liberty to use the Ocean State Job Lot Plaza for a concept plan in terms of what that would look like if we were to adopt a form-based code. Share with you what the build-out analysis of that concept plan is. Talk a little bit more about the form-based code, why we do it, how it works. We're going to talk about the increased tax revenue and the utilization of tax increment financing. Also want to talk about another piece of this project, which is the market to Metacom. A lot of the upfront costs for the study that we've done is funded through a Southern New England Estuaries Protection Grant that is looking at both what the economic impacts of this development are, but also what some of the environmental programs we can do as part of this, and also looking at vulnerable properties in the Market Street area that are susceptible to sea level rise and flooding. We'll briefly talk about traffic improvements. There will be a website dedicated to this project going forward. We'll talk about that, and then we will get into any questions or comments that anyone here tonight might have. I would just ask that you save those to the end. Moving ahead to answer the first question of why we're proposing the zoning ordinance amendment. This is why. This represents, as you've heard me say before, the very worst of 1950s, 1960s planning. Ocean State Job Lot Plaza was in fact constructed in 1965, and it is representative of what was at that time what people thought was pretty good planning. I mean, people didn't have any problem getting in their car driving to places. So these are what we refer to as one-story park in the front. Then we evolved into malls, which became main streets with a roof over them in several levels. People still traversed almost a half a mile from the parking lot to get there. And then with the surge in the internet, malls became a thing of the past as well. Big box stores became a thing of the past. So we're now at what hopefully is the next generation. So essentially at the Job Lot Plaza, we have 3 parcels. If you can see my cursor, you have the small pad site that is in the front. The 8-acre piece is entirely the parking lot with the exception of the bank, the drive-through bank here. And then the third piece represents where the actual plaza itself is. So altogether, that represents approximately over 120,000 square feet of space. Interestingly enough, that the parking lot, which is hardly utilized at all, has an assessed value of almost $800,000. So a landlord or the property owner is paying taxes on that parking lot. And it's hard to imagine that there's much return on that investment. So we hope that through this process and the public process and the adoption of the form-based code that the owners are incentivized to start to think about redevelopment. So with the funding that we received from the SNEP grant, we've engaged both Fuss and O'Neill and Union Studios to put together what is this conceptual master plan. This is an aerial view of the site. You've all seen this many times before. And what I wanted them to look at is what I envision at this location is a town center or a village center, something that can serve all of the residents of Warren and all the residents of the area, but also respects the residential neighborhoods that are on either side of Metacom, that it doesn't overwhelm them, but also provide services to them that perhaps they're not as dependent on their car to have to go to different places. So again, when we look at what's there now, there is a surplus of parking. Down here in the lower right is the auto body, I think that's what it is, or repair shop. That is not part of this parcel. However, we would hope that if development would start to happen in this area, that somebody would have the foresight to see there's some value there that's higher and better than what the current use is. This is a Lauren's restaurant. We haven't done anything with that yet. As we've developed a plan that could potentially stay. It's not the most architecturally offensive building that we have in town, but it's also not winning any architectural awards. But at least it's a little bit more contemporary in its design than some of the other things we see on Metacom Avenue. This is, if you see my cursor, this is the pad site. And then we've got Burger King, and then off the screen, further to the south, we have a medical office building and a CVS. Those properties were both recently sold to an investment fund from Boston. We've had some conversations with respect to possibly doing some rezoning, and I think there'd be some interest to see whether or not that would fall into either part of this project, or certainly they would be interested in the form-based code. So the current zoning on Metacom, as you get down by 426 Metacom, which is Parker Mill, I mean, that's for whatever reason in the village business zoning district, which is really mind-boggling because it really limits what could be done there. And then you've got kind of a mix of commercial with a lot of limitations in terms of what can happen. So if you look through the zoning amendment that I sent out a week or so ago, 7 or 10 days ago, it really opens up the amount of use in terms of what we would allow. And the reason it does that is the form-based code will dictate what much of the use will be based on input from both the planning board, but also I think it's important to engage the local neighborhoods in developing the plan. So when we did, this is what we call a massing study. This is looking at what the configuration of the site is and what we could reasonably put on that site. So when you looked at some of the things in what I sent out with the form-based code earlier, it talked about alleys, and people would say, well, we don't have any alleys in Warren. But when you have this type of development, you actually potentially could, particularly with respect to some of the housing options. So this looks at one entrance in using the existing traffic light that's there. Next to the pad site, there's actually 2 additional curb cuts. That makes 0 sense because that would just be a traffic nightmare, and we're trying to improve traffic in that location. And the other piece is that we would have an exit onto Vernon Street. So this is primarily residential in this corner of Vernon Street, but there would be no ingress into the site from Vernon Street. That would simply be an exit. And you might have noticed if you looked at this closely, we have included a public amenity, which is a performing arts space. And you might ask why we did that. I mean, we know that there are some local education institutions that had been considering the construction of public performance art space prior to COVID. We have every reason to believe when things come back to whatever the new normal is, that still could be a possibility. Certainly there are many people that miss having second story theater in town, and there are a number in East Bay arts groups that were looking for performing arts space. So for whatever reason, that didn't come to fruition. I mean, we can certainly create another use there, whether that be commercial, residential, or another mixed use building. But for planning purposes, and again, to make this a neighborhood feature and kind of a village center, we thought that having performance art space in there was something to consider. Parking for that facility would be underneath the facility, but then there's also ample parking throughout the site. And as you see, the way that we've laid out the site, we've pulled the buildings on the west side back from where the existing buildings are and have parking there. And that's really to create an additional buffer back to the residential neighborhoods. And just, again, this is an early stage conceptual drawing, bird's eye view of what this potentially could look like. Not to say that it's going to look like this, but I wanted to offer some context of what the scale was in terms of what we were creating. I think the largest story we have is 4 stories. Most of these are 3 and 4 story buildings. Again, the Lawrence Restaurant, you'll see that's to the scale that it is now, that stays. That potentially could be another development site. And then we've got the car repair in the corner. So again, the idea is that you have one entrance, circulation through the site is one way. You create some public space, you have trees. The Performance Arts Center is here. That backs up to a storage facility, so it's not imposing on any residential. But again, in my experience doing these projects, people are more visual learners than seeing things in the abstract. And this just gives some sense of what that scale will be. Now, I will say that what we're proposing here is almost double the amount of gross square footage that is taken up by that one strip of Ocean State job lot. But certainly this looks a lot more palatable in terms of the green space that it creates and just what the configuration of the lot looks like. And these are just samples of different housing styles that are done in projects like this. I mean, you've got townhouse, you have row houses, you have apartments, you have condos. Again, just to give some sense of scale and the type of architecture that you would see in a project like this. And the form-based code will dictate what that housing is going to look like, what those housing choices will be, what those materials will be. I think another important part to mention about the form-based code as it relates to housing is that, as you saw in what I sent out in the table of contents, is that the form-based code is very specific in terms of addressing affordable housing or mixed income housing. There are bonuses that can be offered. So if something was projected to be 3 stories, you might go 4 stories if there was a commitment to provide more mixed income housing. But it can be very specific in terms of what the mix of that housing is. So when I did projects like this down in Virginia, I mean, we essentially said we would be trading density, which is the amount that you can build on a site, for units. And it's a very progressive economic development tool that developers appreciate it because they get to build more. They still get income coming from the project, and they have an opportunity for additional units. Similarly, this is the type of mixed use architecture that you would see. This to the top on the left is Mashpee Commons. If you've been there, you've seen what that looks like. The 2 on the bottom are South County Commons. And again, if you've got in those projects, you've got a mix of commercial, residential. At South County Commons, you have a hotel. and you've got a lot of green space and public space. So, that's where it becomes a village center or a town center, where you're really looking to eliminate the acres and acres of impervious surface area. And all of these green acre areas really become stormwater management tools too, which we'll get into a little bit as we move forward. But again, not that it's going to look like this, but just to give you some context that has been done before, it's been done very well before, and offer you the scale of what we're talking about. Everything you're seeing here, 3 to 4 story buildings. So as I said, the current build out at that site is almost 111,499. Job lot takes up about 66,000 of that. We are showing, a series of different buildings with mixed use, residential units being between 900 and 1,000 square feet. You've got a mix of, some are just purely residential, some are residential with commercial on the ground floor. And then we're looking at residential units, for sale units, 20 that are 2,400 square feet, which are quite large. Parking for those would be underneath. So, it gives you a sense of how we could create those mixed income opportunities. Those could be both on the rental side as well as on the home ownership side. And then the Performing Arts Center, we've had 2 different scenarios, but we're just going with the largest now. That would be approximately 33,500 square feet. And that could see anywhere between 500 and 700 people. Does it have to be there? No. Does it have to be that big? No. Again, just to get a sense of what we could, accomplish on the site. So, form-based code it's been talked about quite a bit. Hasn't been really used quite a bit in Rhode Island. Other parts of the country have used it. What really works with form-based code is having community buy-in. So it's important that the planning board signs off on it, but it's also important that the surrounding communities have some input into what is actually going there. And advantages to developers with form-based code is it gives them a predictable path forward for project approval. I shared with you last week some examples of the form-based code that was done down in Arlington, Virginia. And you were seeing projects where a developer came in, followed the form-based code, was getting approval from the time that they submitted the project to the county board, because it's county government down there, signed off on it, to be 7 months. I mean, that is incredible. And that expedited approval process, not only being predictable, is valuable for developers, and they're interested in doing that. So, the form-based code is an alternative zoning district, allows for the regulation of development, helps the community realize its vision for a specific area. I've had numerous people say to me over the last couple of weeks as we started to talk about this, despite whatever negative impressions you might have of what this looks like now, what would happen to Job Lot? What would happen to some of those other businesses? I mean, some of those smaller businesses would have an opportunity to, stay at this site. They might benefit from being in nicer space. Job Lot Plaza, it might be convenient for people. I don't know if that's the highest and best use for this site. I can think of others, but again, if for whatever reason, there was a desire to build a new Ocean State Job Lot facility, then that could be swapped out for some of the other development. But I certainly don't think we should not think about what the potential is for redevelopment and reinvigorating and reinvesting and revitalizing, because we think Ocean State Job Lot is such a critical asset to the community. Because I will say that when you look at Ocean State Job Lot, right next door to it is a Dollar Value store, and right down the street is a Dollar General store. So I'm not sure that we're really losing anything. But anyways, existing zoning typically focuses on separating land use, residential, commercial, industrial. It does little to integrate an integrated approach to development. That's what mixed use is. That's what we're trying to do. The form-based code helps regulate land development, redevelopment by setting careful and clear controls on building form rather than focus strictly on land use. It allows for more density than existing zoning districts. It defines requirements for building heights, building and parking placement, architectural features, as well as standard sidewalks, street trees, parking and public spaces. It gives you a mix of affordability, as we said, with respect to housing units. It can provide a less intensive, expensive option than the current planning and zoning review. Provides a financial incentive by offering a faster and more streamlined approval process. It's a more predictable outcome because everyone knows what to expect because they approved it before it came before them. And the town and the community each benefit from managed growth and public improvements that are aligned with a collective vision for the future. So the advantages here is we get to revitalize 1960 era park in the front, one story, architecturally insignificant buildings. It's an intelligent increase of density. We have the ability to improve the infrastructure with respect to stormwater and transportation, increased housing opportunities, mixed income, rental and ownership, preserves historic character of downtown because it takes development pressure away from that area as well as the eastern portion of the town where there's not public infrastructure, and it significantly, as you'll see later, increases tax revenues. So this is what you received on Friday. We have started to draft the Metacom Avenue Special Revitalization District Form-Based Code. We will continue to do that. My goal is to have that document completed by the end of March. That might sound aggressive, but I think to keep the momentum going, it's important that we complete that. And I'm well into that drafting stage. And my expectation is by our February planning board meeting to have another chunk of that available for you to review. We will not ask you to sign off on the document until it's entirely complete, to the community has had a chance to see it. And then it would be referred to the town council together with the zoning amendment for them to hold public hearings. So as you'll see in the later sections to come, many of those pages are going to show these types of things. It's going to show height. It's going to show where a building is sited on the site, the uses, the elements, and it gives a narrative about that. It gives different examples, and this is not just on the Ocean State Job Lot site. This is going to be for the entire corridor, but it will give where different building types are appropriate. So some of those early pictures where there's an existing small one-story building, those back up, and those are typically on the eastern side of Metacom. We're not going to necessarily want to put a 4-story back to some of those residential neighborhoods in Laurel Park, but we might want to put a 2 or a 3, and we need to think about this. So the form-based code will be a roadmap in order to do that. Again, it gives you a very detailed narrative on how things are developed, and developers like to be able to go to this and look at it and say, okay, they can do a pro forma and say, I can build this much, it's going to cost me this much, the return is going to be this, it's very predictable, it's only going to take me X amount of time to do this. This is something I'm interested in doing. If somebody didn't want to follow the form-based code, they still have the option to go through the normal approval process. They would come before the planning board for conceptual review. If they needed any kind of dimensional relief, they'd still have to go before the zoning board. And as we know, that could extend the life of the approval process for months and even years. But going through the form-based code, knowing that you're checking all the boxes, you save a significant amount of time. The design guidelines will be specific. They'll address, as I said, housing. They'll address signs. They'll address materials. They'll address street trees. They'll address parking. All of those get included within. Some of those are more relaxed than what our current zoning requirements are. We think with some of the traffic improvements and transportation improvements that instead of having a requirement of 2 spaces for a residential unit, we can reduce that to 1.5 spaces with the expectation that there's improved access to public transportation. And certainly after COVID, the amount of people that are able to work remotely, that the need to have 2 cars per household may not necessarily be there anymore. just one more picture in terms of, again, this is a 4-story building. You'd want to pull those buildings that are closest to Metacom, so you create kind of a street edge. And as you get back into the project, that's where you would have your mix of more residential, but then some of the smaller opportunities for commercial. Again, none of this is set in stone. It's just to give you some context in terms of what form-based code can be and what could happen with a little bit of hard work and imagination. So I wanted to include this side because we've talked about where are we with respect to the comprehensive plan. And I felt all along that an update to the comprehensive plan had to weigh heavily on what we did with Metacom, because I really think that this is going to be the guiding direction for where the comprehensive plan takes us. So if we just look at these 5 elements, which are 5 elements that are required in the comprehensive plan, is economic development. Does that box get checked? Absolutely it does. If you look at the amount of investment that we're talking about, which I'll say right now, if we were to build out the scheme that we showed earlier, we're looking at something around $77 million in investment. Could be slightly more than that, but conservatively, that's what we're using. Is it address housing? Yes, we're creating about 161 units of additional housing. Transportation improvements, yes, we'll get to that because we think that creating a 3-lane road rather than a 4-lane road and increased opportunities for public transportation should be part of transit-oriented development, which is what this is. Land use, absolutely, because again, it takes pressure off the historic downtown area, and it takes pressure off the eastern part of town where there isn't infrastructure. And then service and facilities. If we're able to improve stormwater management, that's to the better of the community. And if we're able to create facilities like a performing arts space that's available to the public, then that's a win too. So all of these things are interrelated when we start to get into projects like this. And I don't know that in the past, and this is not a criticism, it's an observation, that we've looked at projects holistically in terms of how they interact and interconnect with each other. So the process moving forward would be, tonight is our informational meeting to talk about it. We're going to complete the draft of the form-based code. I would like to create a form-based code advisory work group, and that is really a group in addition to the planning board. That is a group of residents that are either from neighborhood associations. I know that Laurel Park has a neighborhood association. I don't know if all the other neighborhoods do, but we certainly would encourage members of the public to volunteer to be a part of that as we're drafting the final form-based code. It would then come to the planning board for your approval and a recommendation to the town council. Town council will then hold public hearings on the zoning amendments, and then hopefully this would be adopted. I want to talk a little bit about tax increment financing, because this is, again, a tool that is enabled by the Rhode Island general statutes. It is not readily used yet in Rhode Island. It was something that we used when I was in Virginia. The examples of where it's been used in Rhode Island so far are bad ones. I think that just last week, the city of Pawtucket committed to put some funding into the redevelopment of the area where a proposed soccer stadium is. There's other uses there. I know that tax incremental financing is going to be part of that. But essentially what that is it says that, if you're receiving $10 of property taxes at a location now, and you do redevelopment on that site, and now you're getting $100 in property taxes, that increment from 10 to 190 is something that you can reinvest into infrastructure, into public benefits, into stormwater control. You can also use it to incentivize the developer so it becomes a form of equity. And it's a really good tool because it's not penalizing the existing taxpayers anything. It's not resulting in an increase in their tax rate. I like to refer to this as the but-for money. If you didn't do the project, you wouldn't have this money. And to the extent that it can go into other public improvements away from this site, well, that's a win for everybody. So when we look at this in terms of how much revenue we think we can raise, and this is at full build out, this is not day one or year one, but once the project was built out, using the scenario that we have in the concept plan. So right now, the current property tax received by the town is approximately $125,595. The estimated tax revenue at build out at the full 257,200 gross square footage would be 1.4 million plus. So the increment there is 1.3 million. That's extra money every year at build out. That's a significant amount of money to reinvest into public. And again, that's not, if anything, I mean, it could result in lowering the tax rate in town because you're able to allocate some of this fund for capital projects that the town would take on that, again, but for you wouldn't have access to this capital. So it becomes a really important tool that you have some flexibility to use. At such time as you don't need to invest it into public infrastructure anymore, it flows into the town's general fund, which again is a win-win. So again, I don't want to suggest that you see this day one, but what TIF funding allows you to do is to borrow against the estimated revenue that you're going to receive when it is built out at a low interest rate. And that's done in partnership with the state and with the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. So, I mean, I had a conversation today with the assessor. We're basing the $1.4 million on construction costs of about $300 a square foot. That could be conservative when we figure in what the dirt cost, the land costs are, but vertical construction for these types of projects is roughly in the $250 to $350 range. So these are pretty real numbers. And just, again, I want to offer some context into why using tools that are available to us that aren't being utilized are important. So I also talked about the Market Street issue. So Market Street, particularly in the Belcher's Cove area, is very vulnerable to sea level rise and flooding. And last year we put in an application to SNEP to say, let's look at that, but also let's tie that to the Metacom, because if in fact we're going to generate the kind of revenue we think we can with the TIF funding, and we look at some of the housing stock that we have in that area, as we go out 10, 15, 20, 30 years, there's good potential that some amount of housing there is going to be underwater and is going to be lost. And would we perhaps want to consider using some of the TIF funding to couple that with Army Corps funding and FEMA funding to look at select property buyouts so that we retreat from those areas? But also we know that, we need to improve the quality of stormwater that goes into Belcher's Cove. If anyone has ever been down Market Street on a king tide, that area floods now. We're taking some steps with respect to putting some tide gates in under the culvert at the entrance to J. Mills Park. But in 30 years, there's going to need to be a bridge across that area. And so one thing we wanted to look at is, if we lost that housing stock to flooding, that's lost tax revenue. That's also potentially more expense to the town for if property owners abandon that property. We have the cost of demolition. We have the environmental cost of cleaning that up. Many of these houses have basements. Basements have oil tanks. They have other things. So, our thought is, can we just take a look and get ahead of this a little bit? And SNEP was willing to fund us looking at that study. So, which is advantageous because when we look at some of the stormwater management tools we would incorporate as part of form-based code, at the Ocean State Job Lot Plaza. I mean, these are some of the features. So, we cannot put out any more stormwater than already leaves the site, and we want to drastically reduce that. So you have 8 acres of impervious surface area now. If you've gone north to south on Metacom in a rainstorm, it sheets off of that site through the auto body repair shop, picking up all kinds of funky things, and continues down Metacom. And ultimately, that's either going to the Kickapoo River or it's going into Belcher's Cove. So certainly we don't want to add to that. So you have these best management practices where you're capturing as much of the stormwater on that site as you can, and you're treating it and you're slowly releasing it. So that's one of the things that we're looking at as part of the SNEP grant. But also, I had the benefit the last semester of 2020 to have a grad student from URI available to me to do some detailed GIS mapping in that area. And he created over 100 maps for me. And this just shows 1 foot of sea level rise on a 1-year storm event, which essentially says this is going to happen at least once a year. And what you're seeing is that in that once a year event, and this is in addition to king tide, this is not taking into consideration storm surge, that you have anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5 feet of flooding. That's not a good thing. I mean, I use a photo of that intersection with the entrance to J Mills Park and Market Street, where on that corner, you have an auto body repair shop, you have a dry cleaner, and you have had a furniture stripping business. Those are all environmentally unfriendly uses that when you have flooding and that flooding is going into those buildings, there's a high likelihood that those chemicals are leaching back into the public domain. So, I mean, it's something that we can't ignore. This is a very conservative look in terms of what sea level rise looks like. But also, we look at, this is a 100-year event. So these are, Superstorm Sandy was a 100-year event. We're having more and more of those. The frequency of those storms is more and more. And one thing I've asked the people at URI and CRMC to look at is we tend to look at storms in 50-year storms and 100-year storms. And I think it's important that we start doing some of our mapping looking at 10-year and 25-year events. Banks don't do 100-year mortgages. Banks used to do 40-year mortgages. They don't even do those anymore. But most lenders, are into a loan, 10 years is a long time now for people not to refinance, but we're hoping that we can use some of this data, both with lenders and as well as with insurers, to say, does this really make sense to keep putting money into this? That at some point you're going to be caught upside down, that the losses are going to exceed what you're receiving. And so again, what we looked at, one of the maps we looked at is the amount of damage that happens under the various flooding scenarios. So this is a hot map of that area between Belcher's Cove and out to Child Street down to Arlington, looking at 50% structural damage with 0% sea level rise, which is, we know that isn't happening. We know sea level rise is happening, but just with a 100-year storm event. And the more yellow and more orange is a higher level of damage. Again, we're looking at it, 25 to 50%, still a significant amount of damage. I mean, in that area alone, just in the circle, there's 221 structures that 25 to 50% of them are damaged. So why is that of interest? Because rather than more critical than complete loss, because typically complete loss you're not going to rebuild, is repetitive loss. And repetitive loss is you're going to keep investing money. And I mean, it's like the definition of insanity, thinking that doing the same thing, you're going to have a different outcome. You're not. It's going to get worse. So this is something we want to share with the insurers to say, as you're looking at your underwriting, I mean, does this really make sense from an actuarial standpoint that you're going to have this much repetitive loss? And the idea is, if we were to lose these structures, we don't want to lose these residents from Warren. We want to create other opportunities for them to live in Warren. We don't want to lose the tax revenue for real estate taxes because businesses or these the value is lost. So, that's why we're reinvesting in other areas on Metacom to say, we can be whole. Again, this is not a next year event, but it is a responsibility looking ahead that at some point we are not going to win this fight with respect to resiliency and vulnerability. There's not going to be a flood wall. There's not going to be a dike that's going to be constructed. We've had conversations with DOT. They have their traffic improvement program. They have Market Street on for next year. And we asked, well, what's the plan? They're simply going to repave it. Well, that doesn't, we think you have to take a different look at this. We think you have to look at, vulnerability and sea level rise. You're going to spend millions of dollars to repave a road that's just going to get flooded. So these maps have become very useful to us in conversations beyond just what we're doing on Metacom, but it is part of the funding that allowed us to get this preliminary study done. Again, public transportation improvements. It makes zero sense to me that you come from Bristol where Metacom is a 3-lane road, you hit the Warrentown line and suddenly becomes a drag race because it spreads out to 4. The number of traffic accidents that we have with people making turns, driving too fast, cutting in front of people is ridiculous. And there's study after study that will tell you that traffic flows better at 25 and 35 miles an hour than it does at 45. 25 to 30 is the optimum just because of the amount of braking time and reaction time. But by improving, going from a 4-lane to a 3-lane, it creates other opportunities for us. The turning lanes work. We're trying to engage DOT in this conversation as we start to think about the form-based code and transit-orientated development. It allows, this is an existing typical cross-section. By going to a 3-lane road, you'd have your 2 traffic lanes in the middle turning lane, but also you create alternative buffers, whether that's for cyclists or for pedestrians on the sidewalks. We have pretty decent sidewalks on both sides of Metacom now, but the fact that it's a 4-lane road and the amount of traffic, and it doesn't feel pedestrian safe. So again, it's something that we think through this process that we can bring DOT to the table. And then also the introduction of increased RIPTA bus service. By having a 3-lane road, you can have dedicated bus stations other than the bus stopping in the middle of a lane, holding up traffic, people then trying to jig in and out. And it's just not necessarily a comfortable situation. As I talked about, as part of this process, we will be putting up a website specifically geared towards both the Market Street and Metacom area. We'll have updates on weekly as to where we're going, where people know what we're doing, to share information. This is a high priority for us. These are just some of the draft pages that we would have, how people can get involved through social media, workshops that we're going to have. And then again, as the project gets going, both on the finalization of the form-based code, as well as proposed projects that come forward, the public will have a chance to be another way to share information with them. With that, I have finished my painfully long PowerPoint. I will stop the share and open it up to any comments or questions or just general discussion with respect to Mr. Massey, if you want to unmute yourself.
Bob, I just want to say we've seen this in its varying elements before, and it never gets old. You've done marvelous work here on a very comprehensive plan, which is, as you've noted, can serve as a hub for the town's more complete comprehensive plan. As you had noted, by developing the area around Metacom, it takes pressure not only off the downtown, but off our open spaces and protects our environment. Right now, we are locked on the horns of a dilemma regarding the Settlers Green proposal on Serpentine Road, which is an agricultural area. And that development would be better suited to a place like Metacom. So this is a centerpiece for all the rest of the development and the future, really, of the town of Warren. So thanks so much for your presentation. I'll open it up at this point.
Mr. Gerhardt, I know you want to say something. You just have to unmute yourself.
I would reinforce the chairman's thing. I think it's vital to the town, and I understand it's a huge amount of work. I just hope we can get the buy-in from the community, and I assume the town council will be appreciative. So one question is, what are the limits of the revitalization zone? How far south does it go, and how far off of Metacom?
I think that I have not finalized the map yet because I would looking for some input both from the planning board as well as the communities. But I think at a minimum, it's Child Street to the north, and then the Bristol town line to the south, and then limited to just the Metacom corridor, because certainly particularly on the east side of Metacom, you have more residential. When you get 100 or 200 feet back from Metacom, you have some of that too on the more southern end on the west side. But again, I think you want to be respectful of the transition back to those surrounding neighborhoods. My sense is that, I've mentioned this previously, I think from Market Street continuing to the Mass line, that would be the next area that we take on. Not perhaps as much as the form-based code, but that a zoning amendment. Most of that is rural business right now, and that makes zero sense. Because the only rural business we had was Country Inn, and that was only in its name. And then, the third piece would be to look at Market Street from the intersection of Arlington up to Main Street, particularly the upper part of Market Street as you get closer to Main Street. And I would include the upper piece of Child Street, but that's down the road. But I think the easiest piece for us to start to look at now is the Metacom corridor, because again, just what you have there.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful effort, and I'm proud to be part of it. The tax incentive financing would have to be approved, obviously, by the town council. How do you feel? How do you think they're going to feel about that?
Actually, well, it does. There is enabling legislation. That's why we call this a special revitalization district. So that allows you to take advantage of the enabling legislation. But you're correct. I know that Councilman Eckert is on. I don't know if he wants to be put on the spot or if he just put his picture up. But Brant, are you here? Perhaps not, but
I am Bob, and I
didn't mean to put you on the spot, Brant. I apologize.
No, it's fine. Actually, I'm trying to start my video. Here I am. This is great what you're doing. It's been talked about for years. I remember the original Metacom study that Carolyn Wells did, and we talked about form-based code back then. And I thought it was a marvelous idea. It's just how to get it across. How do we make it happen? And I know you had mentioned that it isn't why you right now. Why not? It seems like it makes so much sense. Why isn't what?
One thing we're going to address is better broadband communication, because you're breaking up on us. Sometimes if you don't have your video on, Brant, you get a better signal.
There we go. Bob, can you hear me now?
Yep, much better.
Okay, so I was talking about the original Metacom study when I was on the planning board, and Carolyn Wells did that study back then, and we talked about form-based code back then, and I thought it was a wonderful tool to implement, but it just never got across the finish line. And you'd mentioned that it isn't widely used in Rhode Island. Is there a reason for that? Why is there reluctance to implement it?
Because it's
I can't answer that. I mean, I think, one of the things that I did early on was reach out to the owners of Job Lot Plaza. Just, I didn't want them to say, why are you using our property? We didn't even know about it. And, their response to me is, typically they have to go to communities and ask for additional density. And oftentimes, particularly in the smaller communities, there's a hesitancy to do that. But, I don't know what the reluctance is, in Rhode Island to do it. I mean, I just, I based on my experience, when I look at something like Metacom, it's ripe for it. I mean, again, you've got most of the development there was done 55, 60, 65 years ago. I mean, and we're not talking about architecture that was done 200 and 300 years ago. There's no architectural significance to anything that's there. I mean, I wasn't here when, the water roller project came through. I mean, my understanding is that they had a little bit of a difficult time, but gee, I mean, hindsight being 2020, I mean, that's a fabulous project. And, this, I think, is all complementary to, the investment that Mr. King made. But, I think there's other opportunities. And interestingly enough, when I was doing this previously, even when you talk to the McDonald's and the Burger Kings and some of the national franchises, if they want to be someplace bad enough, I mean, they'll make it look like a church if that's what you want them to do. So, I mean, you shouldn't be afraid to ask. So, people have said, well, what's going to happen to Job Lot? I mean, Job Lot could stay in that plaza if we could make something that made economic sense. I don't think the business model that they have supports that. I mean, in my mind, the Benny's in Bristol might be a better location, but some of the smaller businesses that are in that plaza could probably do much better than they're doing now. A bakery, a printer, So I think that the fact that everyone that goes there now has to drive. I mean, if there were amenities that would allow people from those surrounding areas to walk and to cross the street and feel safe, now you've really created something, and that's what the goal is. And again, in those other parcels, you're not going to have the scale that you have at Job Lot, but it's all going to benefit from, the incentive that you're creating. That if you're a property, or if this goes forward, if you're a property owner on Metacom, I mean, you got a stimulus check.
So the owner of the Job Lot Plaza is Stop and Shop, is it not?
Royal Ahold, yeah, it's a Dutch company that owns Stop and Shop and some other large supermarket chains throughout the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast.
But they're good business people. It seems to me this would make huge sense to them.
And again, I've had several conversations with them, and I think they're taking the wait see. My sense is that they're not necessarily developers like this, but again, in the form-based code, we get into how could this project be potentially subdivided, and so they could flip off some of these potential development sites. I think typically if somebody was coming in to do the housing piece, there are developers out there that do multifamily housing. That's what their specialty is. There are developers that do mixed use. So I think getting some visibility with what we're doing is going to get interest, just like we're seeing with the National Grid site. The more we talk about it, the more interest we get from people that are interested in potentially relocating there. But I think it's one lesson I've learned is that whether the community wants to be involved or not, you have to extend the opportunity for them to be. If they choose not to be participants in the process, at least you can say you tried to engage them. But if you go ahead and get this approved and you don't reach out to them, and I have to obviously make a better effort than what we're doing tonight, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of community participation. And I'm obligated to do that so they know, because I think that their input is important, because this impacts them. Andrew,
Well, they had the opportunity because of the article in the Warren times.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know how many people read that, and I don't want to rely on that.
I know.
So we probably, I think, we'll probably do some
Uh-oh.
social media. Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, that was actually what I wanted to bring up is although we all know that what we don't want is what's currently there. That's easy. That's a really easy take on it. Warren is a really quirky place, and is really not much like Barrington and not a whole lot like Bristol. And we want to sort of make sure that that's honored. I think, I agree with you, Bob. I think the best way is to figure out a way to proactively reach out and get feedback from the community before you put it in writing, things like the building envelope standards and all of that, and give a chance for the community to be able to make suggestions to you, because that's the best way to get buy-in, is if they really feel like they've had an opportunity to be heard.
Yeah, I agree with that, Andrea. I think it's important, though, to draft the document, because unless they see what it is you're talking about, they don't have a chance to react to it. So, I mean, I would go ahead and draft it and say, this is not final. This is just to show you an example of what we need your input. So this suggests that it's 4-story. Maybe it should be 3-story. But if I ask them to imagine what building use standards are, they may not have the expertise in order to do that. But you certainly want to reinforce that anything that's been drafted, the zoning amendment, the introduction that I provided last week, whatever else we come with, is not by any means the final. It's just a starting point, but here's a little bit of a tutorial to get you to be an informed participant in the conversation.
Is there any way that we could present to them something that's way more visual than a 500-page document? Because that's going to be hard for anyone to sort of get their arms around.
Yeah, I've kicking around a couple of different ideas. And, I'm going to borrow on some of the stuff that we had done in Virginia, because I think that pictures tell 1,000 stories.
Yeah. So, and there's one quick additional point is that, and I'm sort of seeing, and I can see you're heading in this whole project to chip away again at the affordable housing idea. And I don't know how much farther this is going to get us in that direction. So part of me wishes that we would be able to be more proactive in it, and an entire affordable housing kind of investment that this will get us some of the way there, but it's still, we're always just chipping around.
Yeah, so, and I agree with that. And I think that, again, so when you look at revenue from tax increment financing, the public investment is part of that. I had a conversation, and John Mensinger, who is from on our historic district commission, is here tonight. He and I had a conversation earlier today. Mensinger, I have to pronounce it right, he'll correct me. We have a really good affordable housing trust fund ordinance in Warren. Unfortunately, we've never had the resources to fund it. Kate and I on separate occasions have made requests and applications to the Rhode Island Foundation to get some seed money, but potentially investing some of the tax increment financing money into that fund, because it's not just this site. We still have an abundance of underutilized 2nd-story space on Main Street that could be converted to mixed income housing. There's just no incentive for the current owners to do that, and we don't have any tools to incentivize them to do that. So I think that, as a comprehensive look at our affordable housing, that's something we can do. But also, we had a meeting with our state legislative delegation last week. And I think, I made the suggestion that, the legislature needs to relook at how they calculate affordable housing units. So if they're only doing it based on deed restricted units, we're never going to get to the 10% requirement. And I did a quick survey on Zillow of of what residential, what rents are for 2-3 bedroom units in Warren. On average, it's $900 to $1,100. When you look at something like Settlers Green, those units are anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500. That's not affordable. I mean, the other piece is that, and I have a real question with Rhode Island Housing on how they do this. So they base their affordability on area median income. And area median income, and they'll do that on for sale units, you can go to 120% of area median income. So in Warren, area median income is $88,000. 120% of that is about $118,000. So if you're making $118,000, you're somehow eligible for a subsidized mortgage. That intellectually makes zero sense to me. But we're not able to count that number of units that we have on the market and these aren't Section 8 units. These are safe, decent, affordable units because they're not deed restricted. We don't get to count those. And that's unfortunate because we should. And, the definition of affordable housing is safe, decent, affordable. We have lots of affordable housing and some of it is not safe or decent. And so we need to address that. But also, I think that we've got a contrast of two different projects right now. We have the Settlers Green, which is a comprehensive permit application, and then we have the Maine Nobert, which is a comprehensive permit application. My opinion, and I would say it to the developers, that using a comprehensive permit application for Settlers Green benefits the developer only. It moves the needle less than 0.5% of us meeting the 10% goal. Nobert Street, although I don't like the income restrictions that, or lack of restrictions, I should say, that Rhode Island Housing puts on it, the opportunity to have for sale home ownership, affordable units, in exchange for some dimensional relief, that makes a lot more sense to me. But again, I have a question with how Rhode Island Housing does their math. But I think you're correct. The time as part of the comprehensive plan, as part of this project, is for us to have an honest conversation about how we want to treat mixed income housing. Because I think affordable just creates, people just go to the wrong place in their mind when you say affordable, because they don't think about what the income limits are. But mixed income housing to me is a first-year fireman, police officer, a teacher in our schools, people that we want to live in the community. If we're paying a first-year police officer $88,000, I'm signing up.
Yeah, and we don't want to be vulnerable to having people take advantage of those relaxed restrictions in the future. It's just another reason to address the affordable housing need directly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I'm happy. I mean, I want to have that conversation. It's just I don't know where other members, where the council is on it and whether or not how deep they want to get into that. And I'm not going to put Brant on the spot about it, but it is something, again, we have the opportunity both through this effort and tying this into the updating the comprehensive plan that we kind of can't ignore it anymore. We have to deal with it.
But there are some incentives for workforce housing in the form-based code, isn't there? For instance, you get an extra story. That's a huge benefit.
I mean, when I was in Virginia, I mean, we did things based on floor area ratio. So, we would say, okay, you have an FAR floor area ratio of 3, we'll give you 3.5, 4. We want X number of units in the building. They have to be seamless. You're not going to have one floor of just affordable units. You have to integrate those. They have to be built to the same quality standards as the rest of it. Montgomery County, Maryland was one of the first to do this, and it's worked very well. So, again, Section 8 is Section 8. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. In Warren, we have a surplus of Section 8 vouchers because we don't have enough inventory to meet what those strict requirements are. Because for Section 8, it has to be affordable, it has to be safe. And so all we're getting a lot in Warren is it's affordable. it's not safe and it's not decent. Any other comments?
Yeah, but Bob, I just wanted to comment on the lanes on Metacom, because again, it's something that we talked about in the previous Metacom study. And we identified exactly the same thing that you've identified here, that 4 lanes is absurd. It makes no sense. 3 lanes would be better in so many ways that you've already outlined. But we just got pushback from DOT, and I think the council is going to be able to make decisions based on, form-based codes and, the tax increment financing. But when it comes to Metacom Ave and changing the lane design, that's a DOT decision that we'll need our state legislators to help with for sure. We'll need a real big push to get them to comply, because they cited traffic studies which they said would not allow the reduction of the lanes to 3. And so I'm just putting that out there.
I mean, Kate and I have had 2 meetings in the last 2 months with DOT. I think that they've got a fresher look at, they understand what we're doing. They understand the tie-in with public transportation. The original Metacom study, which was done in 2011, 2012, was funded in part by the Federal Highway Traffic Administration. And those are the conclusions that the feds had, and DOT said no, which, I certainly want to circle back on that, because, some of the improvements that can happen on Metacom could in fact result in being federal money, which will put some additional pressure on DOT. But I've heard that argument on the traffic study that, so you're 2 lanes coming in from the Mass border, and then you get to kind of the runaround that Arlington suddenly becomes 2, and Metacom is 2, and then you get to 4, and then suddenly that traffic gets to the Bristol town line and it's back to 3. So the suggestion would be that all of that traffic somehow dispersed itself in Little Warren. It just doesn't make any, I don't buy that. I mean, I think it's a flawed study. If you look at the amount of traffic that comes through Metacom, most of that is going right through Metacom, going right through Bristol, and it's going to Aquidneck Island. And, that's an area, again, so I talk a lot about regionalism. If you had a regional bus that connected people that are using this for a commuter route, and they could get to Aquidneck Island, that makes a lot of sense. When we got RIPTA to introduce 2 buses a day, now it starts at Kennedy Plaza and it ends at the Fish Road Tiverton park lot. I mean, if you're taking the bus to Fish Road parking lot at 6:30 in the morning, you're going to do a drug deal. There's something illegal that you're doing, because it just doesn't make any sense. But if there was a connection that took you to Aquidneck Island and the Innovation Hub and all the things they want to do there, or Raytheon or Newark, that makes a hell of a lot more sense. But, again, Rhode Island is not big on regional thinking. Yeah.
Well, all good arguments about Metacom. We just have to prepare ourselves for a big push to make it happen.
Yep. I agree. I would just go around the room. Mr. Patterson, anything you'd like to add or ask?
No question. Well, I had a few detailed questions, but they'll get covered as we go through this. Without repeating what the chair said and what Mr. Gebhardt said, I think that your work on this is something that obviously should be applauded, but it's also something that's going to be very, very beneficial to the town and to those developers that see an opportunity to make something happen, assuming that they meet the requirements on a much shortened time frame, which will save them money and get the projects done on a faster track. So I'm all for us working through this and getting it on the books, so to speak. So I'll echo the comments of members before. Thank you very much.
Brett, anything?
Thanks, Bob. And I know everyone wants to get going, but given how much work went into this, I've got to take 60 seconds or less and just say thank you for putting so much time and energy into this. It's a great program. I've been impressed with it from the start, and fully on board. I am also happy to be a part of watching this thing come to life. At some point, when you mentioned the reference to South County Commons, I immediately thought, I remember when that was built. I was at URI, and it must have been 01 or 02 at this point. And that's that feeling, that community feeling down in that development with the little common and the coffee shops. That's great. I think that would be perfect for Warren in that area. We've got all this interesting sort of entertainment and whatnot in the summer down in the Water Street area. But, on that side, it would be great to have a little niche area where folks over there can have an alternative as well. And it's just the best sort of planning that I can see. So thanks for all your hard work, and happy to be on board as this moves forward.
Mr. Dixon?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said. I'd also like to point out that, when you give the scenario where we possibly could lose an Ocean State job lots by moving because of this type of development, that would only occur if we're replacing it with a higher revenue generating scenario. Because right now, the Ocean State job lots, they're typically in a second generation type facility. And I just don't see us, these are the kind of problems that we want to have. We want to have problems where we're not losing because people are moving to a nicer project and they have a higher end type of business, which is essentially how the Ocean State job lot facility came into existence as a second generation, is because they moved to a different location. The Stop and Shop moved down into Bristol, and we lost that. But in this scenario, what we would be, the only way we'd lose that second generation tenant would be if there was a demand in the market to replace it with a new development. So then we would essentially be improving the revenue stream going forward across the board. And that's a good thing. We're sort of planning ahead instead of just acting reactively to changes, is I think that something that we could really benefit from. And I think it's one of these things that is necessary for us to be doing, even if you have a mindset that is less concerned about the flood rise. I agree with you, but I don't want people to think that the only reason that we should be doing this is that we're afraid of what's going to happen in that area and how to displace. I think this is something that is critical to the long-term plan of the community anyway.
Right. Mr. Leffers?
I lived in Arlington in the 70s, and it looked like Metacom.
Yeah.
And I've seen how it looks now, and it's a dramatic improvement. So I'm on board.
Thank you. We have some members of the public, so I just don't want to put them on the spot, but if they did want to say something, I will ask them. If they don't, that's fine too. Connie? Connie, did you want to say something? Okay. Andrea, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure you know, Bob, I think this is incredibly important, and it's a great idea. I live right up by there. I walk by there. That place is dying. There's more open than there is filled up there in those small places. So I just want to say, I think that this is all good.
That was the prime location for people wondering if they could put marijuana compassion centers in when that was being floated. So kind of gives you the indicative of where things are at. Mr. Mensinger, anything?
No, I've got nothing to add. Congratulations on a great plan. Good luck with it. Thank you.
Annie Sherman?
Hi there, Bob. Thank you. I'll follow up with you on a different day with further questions. Thank you.
So Annie has done a really good job of kind of promoting some of the things we're doing, particularly with respect to resiliency. She is an author, and anytime we get free publicity and somebody that can be really articulate in their storytelling is good. And so we appreciate Annie's efforts.
Thank you, I
Ashley,
appreciate that.
anything you want to add?
No, but I absolutely love this and spent a few years promoting it myself. So
Some of you may or may not know Ashley. Hopefully after tomorrow night, she will be a member of the planning board. She chairs our economic development board now. She was instrumental in getting Connect Greater Newport going. Now she's with Innovation Lab, which is a spinoff of the Venture Cafe and the Learning Lab in Cambridge, and now in South Seaport area. Is that correct, Ashley?
yes, we run District Hall in the Seaport and Venture Cafe in Cambridge and Providence as well.
So I think that she's going to be a real valuable addition to the planning board, and look forward to hopefully having her approved tomorrow night. So I appreciate you all taking the time. I mean, I'm going to, push this out to the community now. It might be that if we are doing these on Zoom, we might double up on meetings through the next couple of months, just so we can keep this momentum going. And again, I think this will give us momentum to simultaneously work on the comp plan. So I appreciate all your support, and anytime you feel like you need to reach out to me with anything, you know where to reach me. But thank you. Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Bob.
Oh, wait, one moment. Connie says her not working. She would like to see the east side of Metacom included. Yes, we will be doing the east side as well, Connie. We just picked one site where we had the most critical mass in order to do the concept study, but the form-based code will address the entire corridor. All right, folks, thanks very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Bob.